Lord commands us to be merciful if we would hope to receive mercy ourselves. But what does that mean to be merciful? What exactly is mercy? If he tells us certain acts are merciful, how do I know that when I'm doing those acts that they're the real thing? Or how do I know if it's a counterfeit? This is an important thing to know. It's an eternal problem if we get it wrong. Mercy. That's what we're talking right now on the Feral Thomist. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. I'm Jeff Fitzgerald, and this is the Feral Thomist, where we're concerned with the intellectual conversion and the spiritual exercises of that conversion. If you haven't already done so, hit the subscribe button and then hit that notification tab so you can get word whenever a new video comes out, which is about 3 times a week. We are currently in the middle of our work on the spiritual and the corporal works of mercy, which is to say, works of mercy in general. We hear these admonitions that we must perform these works, feed the hungry and so forth. But how do we do it? That's the whole purpose of this. But those are concerns of the works of mercy in particular. Before we get to that, we need to understand the works of mercy in general. What is mercy? What's going on here? Because if we don't understand what mercy is, we don't understand how this whole thing works within the context of our religion, within the context of our discipleship, which we've already talked about, we are very easily led astray by a counterfeit. The devil loves to counterfeit in mockery whatever good thing God does, if possible. He does this by leading us astray in this. So when we think we're being merciful, we are actually committing grave evils. This is something to be watchful for. So because mercy is such a big topic, we're going to be talking here about 10 little points to keep firmly in mind as we are engaging in the works of mercy. These are just sort of guidelines and certain things to just keep in the back of our minds, on the back burner, to make sure we keep ourselves from going astray too much. After this list of 10 things, then I have one serious warning for you to protect you, because if this is forgotten, the other 10 things are meaningless. Let's get to it. Number 1, what is mercy? St. Thomas tells us, mercy is the heartfelt compassion generated in us by the suffering of another, aimed at relieving or alleviating that suffering. Notice he's not saying, I see it and I feel sorry for him. Oh, isn't that too bad? Bless his heart. That is not what's being said. It's generated and it's aimed at alleviating it, at relieving it. Number 2, mercy, even though it is aimed at someone else, has an effect on us. This compassion, right? This mercy that's coming from us, that we are aimed at relieving their suffering. Why is it aimed at relieving their suffering? What is it that makes it mercy? When we go out and we see this, and then I feel this compassion, I suffer with them, right? Compassio. I suffer with them. I have taken in their suffering in myself in some way. Now granted, I'm not taking on their cancer, I'm not taking on their homelessness, I'm not taking on poverty or anything else in that way. But what I am doing is sorrow for their suffering has become part of me. I have stepped out of my own world there and taken on something from theirs. Now this is not the same thing as sentiment. This is not the same thing as, oh, I just feel sorry. Again, it's aimed at the relief of it. Any fool can feel sorry for somebody who is less fortunate. It's quite another thing when we are moved to the point in our own souls that we would seek to go forth and help fix it in some way. That is a crucial distinction to be made. Number 3. Now, because we reaching out and we have this sorrow for others and their suffering, and we're aiming to alleviate it, to relieve it, to give comfort in that way, to fix it, if you will, If we're aiming at it and we have this sorrow, what is this sorrow? Is it a passion? Is it sentiment? Is it a feeling? Or is it a virtue? I mean, are we being commanded by God in mercy to have warm and tender feelings? Does God command feelings like that? No. Sorrow for sin, sorrow for the sufferings of another, is a passion. Okay? And by passion we mean something akin to emotions or sentiment. It's something grounded in the body. Okay? And so this is a natural reaction. Even a Satanist can feel sorrow. So there's nothing particular about sorrow that is good or bad. It's just natural to the human condition. This is what we do. So that's not what's being commanded here. Sorrow, like any passion, when it's regulated by right reason, then may become a virtue. Now, what do we mean by right reason? It makes it sound like I'm intellectualizing this whole thing. Not at all. When I have sorrow, when I have any passion, if it's regulated by right reason, it is being directed in a way that tends to the good. We are not running roughshod. If I look and I see the suffering of a person, and it's not regulated by right reason, then I may hurry off to alleviate that suffering, but in a way that is unjust. If I see a man who doesn't have shoes, so I go into a shoe store and steal him a pair of shoes, yes, I'm providing shoes for him, which seems to be a merciful act, but I'm committing an injustice in the process. If you're burning cities to the ground because you have homeless people, because this way now everybody is homeless and that way everything is fair, you're committing a grave, grave evil by doing this, right? And this is obvious. Passions, like sorrow, must be regulated by right reason. And in that way, they become a virtue. And because then they're virtues, they may be elevated by grace, and then they become, as precepts of Christ, something that tends to our salvation and for true and eternal good. If mercy is a virtue, and it has to be a virtue if it's going to be mercy, where does it fall in the hierarchy of virtues? Where does it go? We said in our very first video that there tends to be this understanding in people's minds that there's a tension between religion and discipleship. And no matter how many videos I do to talk about it, and no matter how much you talk to people about it yourself, people will tend to break themselves up into one of these two camps. If they're on the discipleship side, they say, no, mercy's way up here. And the religion side will say, well, God has to come first, so mercy's down here. That's a tendency that we have as human beings. It's silly, but that's a tendency that we have. So where does mercy fall? When it's really a virtue, where does it go? How are we to understand it? Where is its prioritization? You may be surprised to know. St. Thomas Aquinas says, among all virtues regarding human relations, mercy is the highest. That's it. It's the highest. You say, what does that mean? What it means is, among human relations on the horizontal level, mercy is the highest. Period. Now, so some people on this whole discipleship side would say, oh, well, see, there we go. Hold on. Don't get ahead of yourself. That's among human relations. But everything among human relations is derived from the whole relation to God. Mercy is derived from charity. Charity is the love of God. You cannot have this without this whole being fixed on God. For it to be mercy like this, it must be done for love of neighbor, and that is derived from the love of God, because we love our neighbor for the sake of the love of God. Right? So mercy is derived from charity, and charity comes from and flows from the love of God first and foremost. So we see there is no tension here. But of all the virtues we could talk about in human relations, remember that mercy is the highest. And that means if something in mercy is trying to be performed, you're trying to do, and if it creates a tension with some other social virtue, right? virtue in our relations with other people, then it's not really mercy. Something's wrong. More on that later. Number 5. Think back to the last time you were really, really, really sick. If you're like me, you're unable to pray. You can't say the rosary. It's very difficult to even say the Our Father. The most I can work with then is things like my Jesus mercy and asking God to forgive me. That's because with intense suffering comes this thing where we are incapable of reaching out and suffer with others, meaning we are incapable of compassion for others because we are so confined in our own suffering. This is the nature of it, and this is what it does. This is what this terrible suffering does. You can't pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. It really, in reality, doesn't make any sense. So this is the need for mercy. If someone is suffering like that, we have to remember it's not just fixing their condition, alleviating suffering, and that's it. What we're actually doing by going after and alleviating that suffering, we're also, by reducing the suffering, making that person able to have compassion on other people. Because in their great suffering, they are not able to have compassion on others, St. Thomas tells us. Now, this isn't to say that people who suffer cannot have compassion. I'm saying that the greater and greater the suffering, the less and less able they are to have compassion on others, because we've been so overwhelmed by it. This makes all the more sense than when we see someone who's like a stigmata or a victim of love who is being, for lack of a better word, crucified in their life as a gift from our Lord for the salvation of souls, and they're suffering so greatly. And yet they're able to pray. Yet they are able to have this transforming union, this mystical union with God, with Christ. How can they do that in suffering? Because it's not the physical suffering that's going on with them so much as that freedom of the soul that's going on. It's not the suffering that made them saintly. It's the saintliness that made them able to suffer well, such that even in the midst of this overwhelming pain and overwhelming misery, they are not miserable at all, because they offer it with joy back to the Lord. And that is real sanctity. Number 6. Which are more important, the corporal works of mercy or the spiritual? If you ask a lot of the discipleship people, they'll tell you it's the corporal. And if you ask a lot of the religion people, they'll say the spiritual. So which is it? St. Thomas Aquinas tells us, in no uncertain terms, that the spiritual works are superior to the corporal works. Now, before you freak out, what does that even mean? What it means is, our corporal works of mercy are important, but they're only related to life, and life on this earth is limited. It's a blip. The spiritual works of mercy, however, these pertain to eternal things. They pertain to our everlasting salvation or our everlasting damnation. And that's why they are superior, because these are not just life and death issues. This is eternal life and eternal death issues. This is not to say, St. Thomas tells us, that the corporal works of mercy are actually way down here, because they're not. While the spiritual are superior, the corporal works of mercy are perhaps more necessary in a here and now, right now thing of what I can do. Because the fact of the matter is, admonishing the sinner, let's say, or instructing the ignorant, not everybody can do those things. And maybe the circumstances aren't right for that. And maybe this, and maybe that. There's all kinds of things that has to be factored in there. But feeding the hungry is a very straightforward thing we can do, and that is necessary, because if I can't get this guy to I can't admonish the sinner, I can't instruct the ignorant if he's starving. So while the spiritual works are more important, simply speaking, the corporal works of mercy are more primary in the here and now, right here, right now, particularly in what I can do. Number 7. Acts of mercy are alms. This is kind of a curious way to take it, but this is what St. Thomas tells us. We think of alms as putting money in the poor box. That's as far as we go. and that the works of mercy are something different. No, he says. The works of mercy are themselves alms. And so all the works of mercy fall under the category of alms. Our blessed Lord says throughout the gospel, but let's say in Matthew chapter 6, in the Sermon on the Mount, he says, when you fast, when you pray, when you give alms. He doesn't say if you give alms. It's when you give alms. Alms are precepts. They're commandments. You have to do it. And so he tells us later in Matthew what these alms are. What are these precepts? And this is that whole thing of, when I was hungry, did you give me food? When I was thirsty, did you give me drink? So these are alms. And these have to be understood as that. Number 8. St. Thomas tells us, and he shows us, that when the Lord lays out the list of the work of mercy, let's say the corporal works of mercy, he's not just giving us 7 chores to do. They're not 7 errands. There's a pattern. There's an ordering to it. And by understanding this pattern, we're better able to see what it is we're doing and why we're doing it. This is a gift from God. And so paying attention to this helps us to really grasp what's going on a little bit better. St. Thomas tells us, look, among the corporal works of mercy, we have universal needs being met and we have special needs being met. And among each of these, you have internal and external. Universal needs, things that apply to all of us. Internal, food and drink. External, clothing and shelter. Special needs, so only applying to some of us. Internal, visiting the sick. External, visiting the imprisoned. Doesn't apply to all. And then lastly, afterlife, we bury the dead. These are the 7 things that are going on. They are not simply 7 random tasks. These are things, it's a cohesive whole. The Lord is basically saying, all of these things that you do as acts of mercy, they're a united whole. It's not simply fulfill these 7 things and you're good to go. It's a whole. It's a whole way of living. It's fulfilling needs, universal and special, and it's responding in mercy, in charity, to these things when we see it, for the liberation of that person so that they may be compassionate, but even more importantly, to just truly love our neighbor as ourselves for love of God, because God loves them so as well. And God shows his love so often through us. Number 9. Mercy, as we said, is a virtue when this passion of sorrow is regulated by right reason and we are aimed at alleviating the suffering of others. And this means, because it's regulated by right reason, there's a measure of prudence going on here, and we cannot just run off emotionally and just try to fix it just in a crazy way. There are limits. It has to be a bit measured so that we're doing the right thing and not creating more evil in the world than we are actually fixing. Because of this, there are limits on the one who is giving, and there's a limit on the person who is receiving. We cannot exceed these limits, or we exceed the limits of what mercy is, and then fall into vice or even sin. For the giver, if a person is bestowing mercy, is giving something in this way, you can never, ever, ever give out of what is absolutely necessary for your own life or survival. Now, what does that mean? It means I cannot take whatever little money I have for food and give it to somebody else who is hungry, and then I starve to death. That is never morally acceptable. That is not virtue. It's even worse if I take the money to feed my family and give it away. So now I have starving wife, I have starving children. Anybody who relies on me going without just so I can give it to some other guy. St. Thomas will tell you right off the bat, that is always wrong. You cannot do that. You are, in the name of this act of mercy, committing a grave injustice to the people who depend on you, who rely on you. You cannot do that. That's not selfishness on your part. If you were to violate that, you are being unjust. And we've already said before, if you are trying to be merciful and then you are committing a vice or a sin at the same time in the name of being merciful, then you're not being merciful. Virtues cannot be in conflict with one another. So we have to be very careful about this. St. Thomas adds to this, if we give, we need to give from our surplus. We cannot give from what is absolutely necessary to us, but we can give from what is our surplus. Now, how do we define surplus? Well, obviously, it's what's over and above what is really necessary to us. But he qualifies. There's also what is necessary to us, not just for our basic life, but also for what is necessary to us in our state in life, our duties in life. Now, this is kind of a puzzling way to put it because we don't really think in those terms. But let me give you a brief example. Say I'm a realtor. I sell houses for a living. Now, because I want to give, I'm not putting my family on the street. I'm not, giving away all our money to, food money to somebody else so my kids are starving. We have enough at home to survive. However, I take all the other money I have and all my clothes, except for what I'm wearing on my back, and I give that away to clothe the naked and to feed the hungry and so forth. Now, even though I've still been just to my family, I've still provided what they need. Now I go to sell homes and I'm wearing oily, greasy jeans with holes in it and a ragged t-shirt that's got a huge rip in it, and I'm wearing one flip-flop and then I'm wearing a sneaker on the other foot, and then I'm trying to sell a $500,000 home. No one's going to buy that house from me. My duties in life, my state in life requires I have certain things in order to be able to fulfill these other requirements. This is what St. Thomas means. You have certain responsibilities according to your state in life, and to even give away that money would be unjust in some way. So you have to give, yes, but it has to come from your surplus. And it has to be measured and regulated. Last thing I'll say about this, if you are on your own and no one is beholden, you're not beholden to anyone else in your duties, you don't have anyone else to provide for. If you want to give away everything there, all these other things, it's yours to do with as you see fit, provided your state in life allows for that, provided you're not being unjust to anyone else. And in fact, we say that's admirable. And this is what we do, say when we join a religious order. You're giving everything away. You're selling everything, you give it to the poor. Because that's your state in life. Even then, you're giving it away so that you can follow the Lord more closely. But we must follow this in prudence. And then for the receiver, on the receiver side, we must beware of this. St. Thomas and other church fathers and the doctors are real clear on this. Alms, because mercy is an act of alms, right? Alms goes to those who are in need. Need. That is the crucial word. If a person is not in need, that's not an act of mercy. What makes them in suffering? It's a suffering because they need something and you want to alleviate it. If something is simply not equal, this person doesn't have as much as me, they are not as fortunate as I am, that is not justification on its own. Is there suffering? Are they truly going without, or they just have less than I do? They're eating hamburger and I'm having steak. That's not a cause for alms. If I'm eating anything and they have nothing, that's a totally different situation. Don't be confused on this. Number 10. And this is, in a way, the most crucial thing to remember as we move into the next few videos on the actual works of mercy. The works of mercy, like virtue itself, are not egalitarian. They are not equally accessible to all of us. It's just that simple. We have it in our minds as modern men and women that because all men are created equal, that all virtues are equally accessible, that all graces are equally accessible, that all acts of mercy are equally accessible, because that wouldn't be fair otherwise, we would say. But that is the exact opposite of reality. The fact of the matter is, I will never know what the graces and virtues of motherhood are, and I will never have them. Why? Because I'll never be a mother. I will never know or obtain the virtue of munificence, which is where I'm spending vast sums of money for the good of other people, being a philanthropist. I will never know those virtues because I will never be a rich man. Those virtues, those graces are unattainable to me as a person. That's not a character flaw. That doesn't reduce my place in heaven or anything like that. It just means those are not available to me. And in the same way with the works of mercy, living where I live, or living where we live even in the United States, the odds of seeing a man dying of thirst on the side of the road or sitting out front of a 7-Eleven are extremely slim. How in the world am I supposed to fulfill this in my daily personal life? Yes, you can give money or whatever to help an organization that is doing this in a third world country to provide water. But in your daily life, are you able to provide drink to the thirsty? No. Most of the time, you're not. That doesn't mean you failed in the works of mercy. It doesn't mean you failed in the commandment. It means the opportunity was never given to you. The Lord says, right, when I was hungry, when I was thirsty. Well, if you don't have those, then those don't apply to you. But I guarantee you one of those 7 will be made present to you. Visiting the sick, visiting the imprisoned, burying the dead. These are things that do happen. We do see things. And even if you live in the wealthiest country in the world, where we all have everything we could possibly want materially, all these other things at the end of our list will always be there. There will always be illness and there will always be death. So we still do have at least one available to us, and that is all it takes. So that is our list of 10 considerations as we explore mercy and move into the works of mercy and how better to live those. But I promised you that there would be a warning at the tail end of this, and so there is. Even if you remember nothing else from this video, I want you to remember this. When you are dealing with mercy, you're talking about these acts, these works of mercy, I don't care what any priest or any nun or even the bishop's conference itself tells you. Remember this. As you are engaging in these works of mercy, do not confuse justice with fairness. Do not do it. Because we hear them talk all the time about social justice, social justice. Is there any other kind of justice? That's like saying a one-man show of mercy. I have mercy on myself. No, mercy is a thing among human relations. Justice is the same thing. There is no other kind of justice. All justice is social. But if you define justice in terms of fairness, you have turned the entire works of mercy on its ear. Why? Because if everything is about fairness and not justice, I'm not alleviating suffering. What I'm suddenly doing then is making everything level among all people. It's not that this man has and this man doesn't, so the man who has gives to the man who does not to alleviate his suffering. What fairness does is make it so that not only he gives to alleviate suffering, but he gives such that now they're on even footing. And it's required. This is the absolute destruction of virtue. The absolute destruction. It sounds on its surface like it's this great egalitarian, wonderful land of equality under the eyes of God. But it's not. Because God commands alms, and the taking away for the grand leveling of all creation is not just foolishness, it's sinful to the point of evil. Because if everything is an enforced equality like this, we take away the opportunities for mercy. And more than that, you deny the justice to the man who has. Think of it like this. Say I take 2 children. I take a teenager and a 5-year-old to a fast food restaurant. To the teenager, I give, he has, 2 hamburgers and a large fry and a drink. And then to the child, I give like a child's meal with a toy. The child says, He gets 2, I just get this. That's not fair. Well, what makes it not fair? If the child said that's not just, you'd be like, no, of course it's just. He's bigger than you, he has greater caloric needs than you do, so he gets that. And besides that, little one, you can't eat that much food. He says, no, that's not fair, that's not fair. So you have 2 options here, right? You either buy 2 burgers and a large fry and a drink for the child who cannot possibly finish it, or you get the kids' meal for this one and then the kids' meal for the teenager. The kids' meal the teenager eats that kids' meal like it's a snack. He's still really hungry. Is that just? Is it, oh, it's fair because they're getting the same. Might be fairness, but it's not justice. If they're my children, in justice, I need to be feeding them both sufficiently, and that means their needs are different. In the same way, in acts of mercy, in acts of justice, we are required to have prudence. We're required to meet the needs, and needs are different for different people. It is not one great egalitarian wonderland. We must beware of this. It's not an issue of fairness. These are issues of justice and mercy. Fairness has nothing to do with it. God is not calling on the rich man to be impoverished by the people around him. He calls on the rich man to be merciful to his neighbor. It's not the same thing at all. God calls the impoverished man to receive mercy, to allow the person who has to give to him, and even in his act of receiving, to grow in charity, to pray for his benefactor. St. Thomas says this flat out. That's his obligation as a receiver, is to grow in thanksgiving, to grow in gratitude, to pray for his benefactor, to thank God for God's gracious gift through his benefactor. If it's an issue of fairness, all that's happening is that the recipient grows in envy. He grows in wrath because I don't have as much as he do. That's not fair. There's no virtue at all. It actually makes an enemy of the poor man. It makes the poor man an enemy of the wealthy man. It makes the poor man an enemy of everyone who's not poor. And so we have a satanic rise of sin that replaces justice. Fairness is an ape of justice, and it completely devastates mercy. So do not make this mistake, for your own good as well as for the good of your acts. So I thank you for watching. Now we move in the rest of our series into the specific acts of mercy, beginning with feeding the hungry. If this video was a help in any way, please make sure you share it with others. Let them know about it. The only way I can get the word out about the channel is if you share. If you have not already done so, subscribe, hit the notification button, and I would love to hear comments from people. I really would. Thanks so much. I'm Jeff Fitzgerald. God love you.